Okay, now we're going to start with our first session, which is actually going to talk about what is the role of the song in the storytelling function of Hindi films. We're clearly aware that the most distinctive feature of Indian films, particularly Indian popular films, which basically occupies 95% of the cinema that is produced in this country. The most distinctive feature, and for international audiences, the most bewildering feature, is the song. I mean, even today, they just can't fathom how in the middle of an extremely serious situation, whether it's grieving or whether you're in jail or you're about to be hanged, where the noose is around your neck, the hero bursts into a song, you know. And this, for us, given our sort of way in which we have engaged with stories traditionally, to us it doesn't come as a disturbance or as a narrative stopper or a pause. It's part of the flow. Because in our culture of storytelling, if you look at various traditional forms, the way in which our epics have been narrated, the way in which the oral tradition was furthered by raconteurs and barotes, sort of traveling from place to place, you know, narrating stories, recounting stories with music thrown in and performance. The way in which our theatre, particularly folk theatre, has been practiced over ages. And we know that, I mean, given India's diversity, every region has its distinctive folk theatre form. Music has always been integral. When a child is born, when the child goes through the first stages of, you know, adulthood, puberty, marriage, you know, childbirth, death, it's all, music is a part of our expression of those deep and intense feelings. And yet, today, when cinema is going through a certain transition, we find a little bit of discomfiture taking place there. Younger writers are a little concerned about songs and music, you know, actually suddenly making the whole narrative very self-conscious. That how can a person who is ordinarily, you know, somebody who can identify as one of us, suddenly bursts into this very poetic musical song? You know, how is that? Perhaps given the influence of global cinema, perhaps because also of the influence particularly of Western narratives, perhaps, I'm saying that's what we need to discuss. This discomfiture is taking place and we seem to be going through a certain transition. Quite clearly, when new writers enter the field, given the kind of education that they have gone through, whether formal or self-taught in terms of script writing, ordinarily their first drafts do not contain songs. I began writing in 1992, I remember, and the first drafts of several films, okay, for the first maybe half a decade or so of my professional career, the first draft never contained songs because I would rather that the movie be narrated or scripted without these interludes coming in, you know, because it would be realistic and therefore identifiable. Gradually, of course, I got into the rhythm and I enjoy using music. And I feel that music, there are ways in which music expresses the underlying emotions so much better than it becoming prosaic and, you know, being expressed in words or in dialogue. And yet, this debate has reached some sort of a crossroad, I would say. Clearly we find, and I'm sure Vishal and Anna as well as Jaideep will throw more light on this, that what we notice is that there are two sort of ideologies, so to say, emerging in Hindi cinema. One is the traditional one, where you have movies which are made for a pan-Indian audience, the big movies, the star-driven vehicles, okay, which also follow certain traditional and conventional rhythms of narrative. They happily use songs, lip-sync songs, the hero bursts into a song, dance to woo the lady love and the response, and whatever other emotional situations that come about. And on the other hand, are the others who are using music, but they do not want the expression of music to make the script self-conscious, so therefore they don't use lip sync. Today you'll find, you take a big film like Dangal, and you take a film like Sultan. Both of them sort of coincidentally dealt with similar backdrop of wrestling. And in Sultan, which is a more traditional expression, Salman Khan happily bursts into a song, dance, and it completely fits within the kind of culture of storytelling that we witness there. In Dangal, you don't find anybody lip-syncing at all. Music is used, very effectively and very prominently and very confidently, but none of the characters are actually singing. And this is now becoming almost like there is a tension between these two ideologies, and we wonder which one eventually is going to take over the future. And of course, you have people writing independent films which have no music at all. And it's almost used as a counterpoint that we are actually breaking the rules, we are becoming unconventional, we want to be unorthodox, we want to make a departure from our conventional or so-called formulaic narratives, and therefore we will narrate a film without the use of songs. Fair enough. But I think it is time for us to pay attention to and perhaps debate the contours and the implications and the uses and the disadvantages of this particular element in our traditional cinema. Also, given the fact that Indian cinema is becoming very ambitious about expanding its footprint and including non-Indian audiences as part of their viewers, I think this question needs to be addressed. I trust you're aware that when a film which has done very well in India has to be released abroad, there is something called an international cut. I think the insiders are aware of that, which means they remove the songs. They cut down the length, they remove the melodramatic portions, and they cut down the songs, making it palatable for the international audience. Is this really the way out? Are we not confident enough that there is an easily accessible form that we are expressing which people can get into? It can be as culturally specific as it wants to be. These are the kind of questions that I want us to address here. So the format will be that for about 45 minutes we will have a discussion on stage amongst the four of us, and then for half an hour we'll throw it open for question and answers. So, and there'll be volunteers around with their mics, so please feel free to ask questions which are relevant to the topic. Now it's my privilege and my pleasure to invite my panelists onto the stage. First and foremost, I'd like to call upon my good friend Jaideep Sahni. Okay. Doesn't need any introduction, but there's a formality involved, and Dr. Pradhan has insisted that introductions should take place, so I am merely following his instructions here. Jaideep is one of our better-known screenwriters in Hindi cinema. He has used the popular form with a very sort of fine aesthetic, I would say. All the traditional elements that you find in Hindi films and Hindi scripts find their way into Jaideep's thing, and yet there is a certain particularity to it. There's a cultural specificity. His attention to detail of characters and their characterization is virtually unparalleled, which is why his films become actually events. And in the case of both Vishal and him, these are the two people, or one of the two very few people, where it is because they are behind the film, they have written the film, that the audience looks forward to it, and not because there is a face involved that this is a Salman Khan film or this is a Shah Rukh Khan film, but this is a film written by Jaideep Sahni, this is a film written and directed by Vishal Bhardwaj. So we are really very lucky that Jaideep had the time, and he's generally a rather shy sort of person, but bullying works sometimes with him too, and it works. And the notable films that he is responsible for are, of course, Khosla Ka Ghosla, Chak De India, Bunty Aur Bubbly, which was a huge blockbuster. Then there was Company, which I liked very much, and several others which he has penned. Okay, it takes some time, so we don't see as many films as we'd like to coming from his computer. But whenever they do come, we enjoy it very much. Second person I'd like to invite is, again, a very good friend, a very close friend, and a stalwart of the Hindi film industry who really exploded onto the sort of firmament and onto the horizon with a film called Maqbool, which is the first of a trilogy of adaptations of Shakespeare, something which, frankly speaking, hardly anyone had dared to attempt. You know, Gulzar Saab perhaps was the only one who had attempted Angur and maybe one more. But the serious dramas of Shakespeare, generally Hindi films shied away from. And Vishal came and blazed a trail, really opening out, okay, the whole bandwidth of possibilities of again, the kind of themes and stories that could come into Hindi cinema. So he followed it up, Maqbool was followed up with, Maqbool, which is of course based on Macbeth, followed up with Omkara, based on Othello, and then came Heather, perhaps his most ambitious one. I mean, Hamlet. I mean, you really need to have, I think, a liver of steel to attempt Shakespeare's Hamlet. And yet he managed to do that, combining the whole turmoil of Kashmir and in fact characterizing Kashmir in a Hamletian sort of way. So something which all of us have been very proud of. And he's been a music director, which he was to begin with. Then of course he became a writer, a director, a producer, and several other hats. And someday, who knows, he might even become a star. Okay, so without further ado, Vishal, my privilege to please invite you. So these two are practitioners as well as thinkers, observers, who will offer us a lot of insights into that. And now it is my privilege to call upon a tremendous scholar. The lady is called Anna Morcom, and it's really a matter of good fortune for us that Dr. Pradhan sort of mentioned that Anna Morcom was in town, and I said, let's grab her and ensure that she participates in this, and fortunately she agreed. Anna studied Hindi film music and Hindi at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Okay, so she speaks Hindi also. Then she did her PhD in the Hindi film song, which is published in the form of a book that I'm sure she will tell us about when she comes here. Then she followed it up with a series of other publications. And she specializes in actually Indian music and Indian dance, okay, Indian as well as Tibetan. She's right now here on a research trip, which I hope she will tell us about a little bit. And yes, it's very, as I said, it's very fortunate for us that she happens to be in town, and this scholar can join in the discussion and add a third angle to it, of course, making all three of us very nervous, I mean, given her views. Yeah. Okay. So, Anna, please. Okay. We don't need to wait for a preface because I already gave that there. So essentially, these are the kind of questions that I thought we would tackle. One is really revisiting what is the role that the song plays in Hindi films. And really speaking, if you begin to list, easily you will come across about 22 major categories of its uses. We can't sort of, this is not some educational sort of workshop here, it's just a discussion. So we're just going to touch upon some which are more popularly used. And given that, I also want you people to pay attention to what are the newer ways in which we have begun to use song, the evolution of the function of the Hindi film song in popular cinema. That is what we want to touch upon. Then the second thing which I was very keen on is that there is a debate that this compulsory use of songs is actually becoming an impediment to the modernization of the Hindi film expression, the narrative expression. And which is also why we don't seem to be attracting audiences across the board. Whereas you have Hollywood travels, Latin American cinema travels, European cinema travels, Russian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, all these cultures, their stories seem to travel. Ours don't travel very much. We're more focused on either the domestic Indian audience or the diaspora. That's it. And we aim it only for that. Is it because we believe that these elements are mandatory? Primarily songs. In that, Vishal, perhaps since you're also a producer, you can also touch upon the need for songs sometimes as a marketing tool that companies seem to insist on. So which, if you feel that, we can touch upon that too. And the last thing, as I mentioned, is that where is the future? Where are we headed? I mean, what is 10 years from now? What do these people see as the future of songs in Hindi films? Touching upon the lip sync and the non-lip sync debate also, if you wish. So, Vishal, if we can start with that. Citing from your own experience also, and from your own sort of narrative ideology, so to say, perspective. when you are writing a story, okay, how naturally or otherwise are you aware, or do songs sort of slip into your narrative? Do you have to be conscious कि भैया मेरे को 3-4 गाने तो डालने हैं इसके अंदर, तो उसके लिए जगह बनानी पड़ेगी, or while you are conceiving of the story itself, do those songs begin to naturally emerge and you feel that they organically belong to that situation which is part of the script?
Actually, it's connected to my journey because when I became director, the reason was that I could survive as a music composer. So that's the reason I became director, and I knew that I'm not going to get work in music unless I do something like I'm doing now. So my journey is that, so my earlier films, say Makdi तो बच्चों की फिल्म थी, ठीक था, पर मकबूल में consciously I wanted to see that I should have songs. And I remember Vinay ji is also here. There were 2 songs in Maqbool. They were back to back, and he told me that you should let go of one song, something like that. But later, say in Omkara, I started becoming a little conscious of using the lip sync. And of course, even Shakespeare had a situation where B.D. Jalele is, the Iago sings a song over there. So, the character of Bipasha Basu Billo Chaman Bahar was created so I can have a kind of, a justification that she's an orchestra singer, there's an orchestra behind, and I wanted to have item numbers because I was dying to create, hit songs, and I wanted to have that opportunity. So that's where, but then I let go of that reality in Namak Ishqa, where, she's dancing in a police station. And later, say in Heather, I became more conscious because I wanted to, because I always remained in conflict whether to use a lip sync or to use it in the background. As a filmmaker, I thought that I should not be using lip sync. And as a music composer, it always came out that, so when the situation of that Bismil song came, where in Hamlet,
yes.
What's that called, that situation? Where he performs in song. There's that play within a play.
Yes.
So that's where I thought that this is the best place to have a song. And in Kashmir, there is a tradition of this bhand where they perform.
Yes.
And I happened to, I was directing an opera where I worked with Dadi Padamji, and I wanted to use those, big puppets. So, and there also, I made the musicians sit on top of set just, to feel comfortable on set that I'm not doing something which will take away the reality. So now I think in my next film, and I have becoming more conscious of not using, but the lip sync. But without music, of course, I can't think of a script. When I am writing the script, there are moments which demand a song, and when I'm writing, it naturally comes to me that there has to be a song.
Okay. I want to touch upon both these points that you raised. One is that you feel that while you are saying that while you're scripting, quite naturally songs come in. We're going to sort of talk about that, and your self-consciousness about the lip sync thing. Take the case of our earlier cinema, which we very easily embrace. People like Guru Dutt, Bimal Roy, Mehboob Khan. I mean, these are filmmakers that we have really admired. All 3 of them, Raj Kapoor, if you wish, all of them have used lip sync songs. I mean, Guru Dutt's alienated artist, sings Jaane Wo Kaise, and then he sings from the stage. And we don't find it amiss at all. We don't ever question why is it that this man suddenly has developed a musical sort of, voice box? So you relate to that quite easily. And yet in your own cinema, you feel that maybe one should not be putting it. Why is there this difference in sensibility?
Because there I see as an audience, and I'm part of this growth of, where I have also grown up on that music, on Ala Udal or Ramayana being performed on stage in the music, and it's in my blood, it's in my soul. So when I watch it as an audience, jab pyar kiya to darna kiya, how would that, she can't argue in a scene with Akbar. So she has to sing and she can get away with that. And all Amar Akbar Anthony, and I have grown up on that. When I see it as an audience even today, I won't mind. But if I'm doing it as a professional, then I'm conflicted.
But that's what I'm asking you, why?
Yeah, because I'm a professional. I can like something, but when I'm creating something, it's my choice as a professional.
No, done. Of course, it's a choice. I'm not taking that away. I'm just saying that, therefore, your, again, narrative sort of ideology, as I called it, then you're making a departure from what Bimalda or Gurudutt or any one of those people sort of believe in. You feel that your thinking is different. That's precisely what I want to touch.
Yeah.
Maybe if you were in the 60s, you might sort of be quite happy to have these characters singing those songs.
Yes, and I think that's how the cinema is also evolving.
That's what I want.
Cinema is evolving now, and where we are conscious, and when we say that our films are not traveling because of song and dance, I think it's not just the song and dance; it's the way we tell a story, and more the reason is I think we are so overly populated and we are such a self-sufficient market that we don't need to reach out. The smaller filmmaking countries like Iran, and because they really need money from other than their own community, so they try to reach out. And we consciously, we don't need the field to reach out to. It's just for our pride, for our ego, we want to reach out to Western audiences. It's not that we need money. The moment we'll start needing money from the Western audiences, I think our style of storytelling will change. They also make musical, but when they make musical, they are pure musicals. That's why they feel odd. They are confused whether it's a musical or it's a drama, because they also make musicals. La La Land is the latest example. So we confuse them, and which is not confusion for us at all, which is so natural for us.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, also in terms of other genres, I mean, we don't make films based on genres. Okay. Okay, I'm going to come back to you after one round on what are those situations which you feel more easily lend themselves to a musical or a lyrical expression, and which would otherwise perhaps look rather odd and stiff if they were expressed in words. Like Pyar Kiya to Darna Kya was one of the things you gave. But about your thinking, today's thinking. Jaideep, tell me, I'm going to take off from what Vishal said last, that perhaps the reason why we do not feel the need to appeal to a non-Indian audience is because we have enough business, so to say, coming here. And yet, I feel that like Hollywood, for example, has a lot of money, okay, and yet almost 60%, if not more, of their business comes from outside because they're ambitious business-wise. Do you feel that this is what is perhaps keeping us complacent, so to say? That seems to be the subtext of what Vishal was saying, that we don't feel the need to make departures. We don't feel the need to evolve or reinvent our storytelling style because we're quite content with that. Or is it that we feel strongly that this is how it should be, songs should be there? Tell me, I mean, what is the purpose for this song so tenaciously continuing in our cinema?
I think I agree with Vishal that one big reason is that the people who are financing the films or distributing the films, they really don't need money from the West or from other parts of the world. That is a very big reason. So, yeah, of course.
Jaideep, if you really do a statistical study, okay, about 85% of our films do not recover their money from theatrical revenues. That's true. Okay, the series of, the industry is constantly screaming about, oh, we are bleeding, you know, this is a bad year. So then one would imagine that the natural thing to do would be to expand your markets.
Yeah, but two things. One, bad year. Sure, we've been having bad years ever since I've joined the film industry. But everyone buys a Mercedes every year. Yeah. So I don't know who has the bad year. Maybe writers have bad year. I don't see any studios or producers having bad years. So it does. So all that talk doesn't show up in people's lifestyles or their purchasing choices. So that is. So I think this bad year thing is a bit of a fraud. And so now the other thing is that taking off from what Vishal was saying. Taking your form abroad or your way of storytelling abroad, with basically taking your stories abroad and saying what I have a concern for or I want to tell, people in other cultures would be interested in or I wish to have them interested. So that's what I mean by the people who are looking for money. Because it just doesn't, it's not just a decision of having songs or not, which is a decision. It's also a decision for the ambition can only come with a whole lot of learning and understanding of how distribution works in other geographies, how marketing works in other geographies, which is humongous amount of learning and investment. So let's say that an ambition on the part of storytellers to want to reach other cultures cannot work independently of ambition on the part of, say, the studio people here or the marketing or distribution people here, because they also have to share the same ambition, which very often they don't, because of what Vishal said, there's a certain amount of cushiness in our system because we have our own audience and we have our NRI audience, which is kind of even more traditional than our audience here.
Or more regressive.
Yeah, so I was just being kind. So, yeah, so, I mean, why would, it's very difficult for people to have the motivation to try and reinvent our form in a way that people from other cultures are able to enjoy. One, of course, is the language. And if people in another culture don't, it's like me seeing a Korean or Chinese film which has 6 songs and I don't understand the language. Our subtitlers, we don't have very good subtitlers, which is a general problem of our literature. In any case, we don't have very good translators. So then jo adaigi hoti hai or whatever the expressions are, so to them it just looks unnatural because they don't understand the subtext of the songs. First of all, they don't understand the lyrics only. Then within the lyrics there are silences, there is subtext, there's a whole lot of cultural layering which people who understand our culture knows that they have no way of knowing. So it is a kind of a barrier in a way. And to try and upgrade and invent this form, it's a much easier task to just put a Karwa Chauth song and get away with it, man. $1 is 65 bucks a rupee. So they get their money from that. And those are actually the very real reasons that there is no commercial and also commercial reason to invent on part of people who say control the purse strings. And also, I don't think we have quite cracked how to do it yet.
So you're saying it's by default that this element seems to continue. Tell me again, okay, I'm asking you once again, what is the reason for the tenacity of the persistence of continuation of songs in the films? Even today, Vishal did speak about how the cinema is evolving, certainly. And yet, music's not disappearing. Okay, and it's not going to. I mean, I'm saying God bless it. I mean, I'm quite happy with the fact that we all enjoy it. And yet, I want us to address this issue. What could be the reason? You're almost indicating or implying that if there was a commercial need, okay, I don't know, that's debatable. Okay, if there was a commercial need, then we would perhaps, work towards removing music because to, expand the frontiers of our markets. Is that what you're saying? That therefore we would be quite happy to let go of it?
What I'm saying is that is the path of least resistance. And that is the fastest and easiest way to make our stories travel. What I'm not saying is that doesn't mean that we should not have the ambition of making a story in our form travel. But it's just that the easier path is much easier.
Okay, let's for a second leave the travel part aside. Just let's address this question. How imperative is it for popular Hindi cinema to have songs?
I think that's a question I've been asking myself for 16 years because I started as a lyricist. I had done a bunch of albums as a lyricist before I discovered screenwriting, one with Shubhaji. So I mean, it's a little bit of like how his story was, that when I first came, and I used to write lyrics because I used to love songs. And because like everyone, I mean, a lot of people in my kind of background, we had grown up watching Chitrar and Hindi films and reading Ramayana and Mahabharata and all the rest of it. So I always saw it as speaking in verse. So I said, क्या problem है? ऐसे बोल रहा हूँ, क्या फर्क पड़ता है? मतलब there was no gap. I mean, there was no compartment in my head ever. So it was natural for me. I happened to discover screenwriting because I found the screenplay of Gandhi in a bookshop. So then when I read it, I was a computer engineer, so at that time, for some strange reason, it looked to me like a program to make a film. Matlab a series of instructions I followed faithfully. So once I started writing screenplays, my first reaction in my first film was, for example, we were doing a film called Jungle. That was my first film, and then this couple is running away from some bandits in the jungle, and then the director said, okay, now this is a good place, so they should sing a song. So I was like, dude, like, you know, we just wrote a scene before this that they're whispering because nobody should hear them. And like, how are all the bandits suddenly going to, you know, like turn deaf? I mean, how does this work? And like, I'm a person who loves songs. My grounding or whatever, informal as it may be, was as a lyricist. But I had that objection saying, I love songs, but I'm not mental. So, so that was my first reaction. And then Ramu sat me down and explained to me music rights and how 40 or 50% of the film's budget comes from selling songs. So things need to have songs. And I was like, okay. So then Sameer Bhai wrote this song, Do Pyar Karne Wale Jungle Mein Kho Gaye. And I am thinking, खो तो गए, पीछे से राजपाल यादव आके गला काट देगा, तुम्हारा क्या कर रहे हो? So that's how it started.
So tell me now, what is your assessment?
So I'll give you another example. So, but in my next film, say Company, I myself used it in the script. There was a song called Sab Ganda Hai Par Dhanda Hai. I myself wrote that song in the script because I thought it was a good thing because I was able to set up and tell people about that environment and how these people think, and because it was more of a business film. Otherwise, our entire first half would have been another Satya. So it saved me 1.5 hours of the screenplay to do in just those 4 minutes, and it literally saved me a whole half. So I think my thing is also like Vishal's thing, that you have a love-hate relationship with putting songs in the film, and some subject you feel naturally demands a song, and it happens organically. Some subject you feel doesn't like. For example, when I wrote Rocket Singh, we did not do lip sync songs in that. And then my father once told me, तुम 2 गाने डाल देते तो तुम्हारा क्या बिगड़ जाता? Because the film didn't do well. And we were like, okay, they're salesmen and मतलब office में गाने क्यों गाएंगे? Then one day I thought, Johnny Walker साहब का Mr. and Mrs. 55 का गाना था, ऑफिस में इंटरवल हो गई, सब वो टेबल के नीचे घुस के एक एक्ट्रेस के साथ गाना गा रहे थे, जाने का मेरा जिगर गया. So then that doesn't strike you at that point of time because you're in mode of that world and you're thinking, okay, how hard is a salesman life or whatever. Then, but राकेश रोशन साहब तो ईटी को गवा दिया. अब स्टीवन स्पीलबर्ग मतलब सोच रहा देखेगा तो वो सोच, you can imagine and you can do it, but I think very often because we are in the zone of that particular film and that particular, sometimes it doesn't strike us, sometimes we have a conflicted relationship with it ourselves. Sometimes as a lyricist I fight my other friends who I am writing lyrics for, saying यहाँ क्यों गाना डाल रहे हो. Sometimes I am only saying कि सबसे पहले गाना होना चाहिए, फिर story start करेंगे.
Okay, I will, as I said in the second round, I want to come to what are the natural sort of for us situations or the natural sort of needs that arise in our scripts, which we feel a song is appropriate, even given the changing ideology and given the love-hate relationship that both of you spoke about with songs. Anna, there was a film called Monsoon Wedding, yeah? Mira's film, Sabrina's script. which was culturally very specific to a certain subculture of Punjabi, sort of the Punjabi community. And it dealt with a very specific situation which was highly ceremonious, like the wedding, and and it used music also. It used a certain kind of vibrance in expression that we find typical of that community in India. And that film went all over the place. I mean, it was perhaps the highest Hindi film earner, if I am, it was. It went everywhere. Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Latin America, etc. also, I think. But certainly in the West, it did very well. How do you explain this phenomenon, which used very typical Indian elements, which Meera used very confidently and almost chest-thumpingly, and yet the Western audiences, I mean, it wasn't only for the diaspora, I mean, all white audiences sort of, and various other audiences sort of saw it.
It was not for diaspora, it was for...
In fact, yeah, but it was very, very typically Indian, I mean, in terms of... Tell me.
I think that film... That film, you can see it's made in a format that will be accepted by a Western audience. There are songs there. I've seen it, but I can't remember it in such detail. But they occur more naturally in the context of a wedding where music is happening, on the ground. So it's not the same as having somebody suddenly burst into song in the middle of the jungle. This is the sort of situation that the Western audience just doesn't understand. And I think the other problem is the Western musicals. The song and dance scenes are generally the whole old Hollywood musicals. They're kind of light and frothy and fun, and they're not melodramas. So Hindi films combine music and dance, singing and dance, in lip sync, with absolute knife edge, life and death melodrama, and I think that's the problem. So in a Western film, it needs to somehow be much lighter, or just spectacle, just display. So like what's the film? Nicole Kidman,
Moulin Rouge.
Thank you. Yes, Moulin Rouge. So that's, and then I think the other thing that then happened in the international.
What do you say about Chicago and all? They have like.
Well, they're stage musicals, and then they're closer to opera. So if you look at opera is closer to Western opera is closer to your kind of masala, Hindi film, because you have melodrama and it's sung. Yeah. And the same with those stage musicals. But then in cinema, you've had this discourse of realism, or then you have these funny, light, sort of entertaining films which have song and dance. So I think there's been that problem of combining the two for the Western audience, because they'll just say, oh, it's unrealistic. And people are just so used to that terminology and that idea that realism means it's good, and if it's unrealistic, it may be fun, it may be nice, but it's not really good. And I think we still haven't kind of got beyond that. And now in the West, people are starting to like Bollywood, as it started to be called. It wasn't called that 20 years ago even. But then that is also in a slightly stereotype way. Bollywood, oh yeah, there's song and there's dance and it's so colourful, and it's a stereotype way, and I don't think people really understand songs as this part of melodrama, like the Pyar Kiya To Darna Kya, or the song from Mother India, or Mere Lal Aaja. I mean, that's just an extraordinary song where you could not have a song in a Hollywood film like that. So as I started to look at the songs in Hindi films really closely, I saw this incredible interweaving of the drama, the melodrama, the narrative, and that has shaped the music as well. But I do see that unraveling now, and I think it is about the international audience, but I think also, you can tell me what you think of my theory, because you people actually make the films. I'm just looking at them. There are songs in Hollywood films, there are pop songs in Hollywood films since kind of 60s. You've had this pop songs in the background, and a lot of Hindi films now have songs in the background. And they have some lip sync songs. The lip sync songs are often more big spectacle dance numbers. Not so often the kind of song somebody just, they're falling in love and then bang, you have the big song and dance number. So the difference is, with a lip sync song, is the character acts it out. They actually enact it. And it's also quite declamatory. It's a big sort of announcement. So you always had this moment in Hindi films where it's like, yaar ho gaya, it has to be kind of shouted out. And probably the majority of Hindi film songs have been on love. And love is also...
A lot of them, yeah.
Love was the main structure of the Hindi film melodrama. And in the olden days, still in India, but before, love, personal love, your individual love, in a society where the norm is arranged marriage, marriage is for the family, for the community, for the society, then individual love is always potentially melodramatic. It's always the struggle of the personal and private. So I see with these kinds of lip sync songs where people are performing, also in those sequences people perform often to the camera, very frontal, rather than if you have a background song, the shots are like, the rest of the film. There's not such a difference. So I think there's a change in India where love is becoming more of a private choice. And you see that in films. You have a rom-com or a thriller, whatever, the couple get together, but it's not a big deal. It's not the whole linchpin of the whole film. So I think there's a connection here with...
Yeah, but you still, even in those kind of cinemas, on those kind of stories, you still have love songs. I mean, even if it's a private and a personal choice, I mean, where the larger conflict between the community or the society or the convention and the individual has dissolved.
Yes.
And yet the intensity of love and the exuberance of it, which they want to express, I mean, songs are perhaps... seem to be a very natural choice.
But more in the background, those kinds of
Not necessarily.
songs.
I mean, even today you find that happening. And there is, I have a feeling which I'm also going to sort of address quite clearly, which I mentioned in the preface, that there seems to be a whole brand of cinema which is still very traditional, which is what we call pan-Indian. When they have pan-Indian objectives, when actually, I mean, see, Vishal and Jaideep are unfortunately different from those. I mean, unfortunately, because we don't have those people as part of the debate. Because they write being true to the story, and whoever the story reaches will reach. So their aim is universal, but they're not designing it, keeping a certain audience in mind. Whereas there are people who actually do that, and for them these elements then become very important because they feel that this is what the pan-Indian audience expects from our cinematic storytelling, and therefore quite naturally they come in. Their job is to weave it in as naturally as possible. Melodrama, the large confrontations, the dialogue bazi, as well as the song, dance, and the use of music. Anyway, so okay, that was an interesting point that you made. Vishal, I'm going to draw you to one particular interview that Baz Luhrmann gave, since Moulin Rouge was mentioned here. It was interesting to see that he was saying post Moulin Rouge, I think it was an NDTV or an Indian channel which had interviewed him. And he said that he and Frank Darabont, who made, as you know, Shawshank Redemption and several other notable films, and Martin Scorsese were having a discussion, and they said that in their quest for realism in cinema, which through the 60s, 70s, 80s, they went through that whole phase, and they felt that yes, certain very hard-hitting narratives came out, which really touched a lot of people. People began to look upon that cinema as a credible alternative to the spectacle and the, of earlier Hollywood. But they felt that they were losing out on the magic. That this was all very realistic. Okay, where's the magic? Cinema should be about magic. And suddenly they felt very dry, and this Luhrmann sort of said it quite honestly, and he said, we didn't know where to look for inspiration. And then suddenly it struck us, where else but India? And so he said, because in India there is a certain kind of magical vibrance, a certain vigor, a kind of vitality that seems to be there in our storytelling, and which was very attractive. And hence, Baz Luhrmann was explaining that was the context through which he attempted a Moulin Rouge, that we need to sort of, also move away from this, almost slavish loyalty to realism. And once again, that brings me to the two of you, because you two are, from what I can gather, and Vishal, forgive me for sort of almost like second guessing both of you, is that there seems to be right now a straddling of two different streams in your mind. One is of being faithful and more realistic and more credible in your storytelling, okay, as you said, evolving nature of that, where you can enjoy Bimal Roy, but when Vishal is writing himself, he's not so sure that it should be there. On the other hand, there is also a fondness for this expression, for the element of songs. And therefore, constantly, you, Jaideep, also said that we have to take it on a case-to-case basis. Sometimes it's hate and sometimes it's love. So I'm going to touch upon this, that given this, using your own examples, where are you headed? Supposing I were to put you, Vishal, say about 5 years from now, if you begin scripting, what do you anticipate in terms of your relationship with music or with songs in that script of yours 5 years hence?
Definitely I'll be using songs, and sometimes it also depends, the kind of subject you choose. That I might choose a subject which is like about a serial killer where I don't need a song. But the kind of cinema which I think I'll be making, it will have songs. I think Heather is a very, very important example for myself, if not for anyone, that barring this one lip sync song of, and two, that Gravedigger song also.
Now the Gravedigger song.
Yeah.
But there also you would put it, sorry to interrupt, naturally as that those characters could well be people who sang as part of their sort of...
And again, it was in Shakespeare also,
Yes.
They were also singing Gravedigger, and I think it was a great situation to have a song where, it's like so black, and to see that the people who are living with corpses and in Kabristan mein jo reh rahe hain, तो we have a great opportunity to make a song on Gravediggers, जहाँ पे आओ ना के जहाँ गई. बट उसमें एक और गाना है वो झेलम झेलम ढूंढे किनारा. वो सॉन्ग जिस तरीके से हुआ है, दैट्स आई थिंक इज द बेस्ट वे टू फॉर्म इन माय म्यूजिक, इन माय फिल्म्स, टू यूज म्यूजिक, कि जहाँ पे ही इज गोइंग इन सर्च ऑफ हिज फादर and I have this song, so it's enhancing the emotion, and yet the plot is moving and the character is active, and still I am having both the impact of the music, which is underlining that you have to feel this emotion and aggressively उसको penetrate कर रहा है, और जहाँ पे कहानी भी साथ में चल रही है.
तो यहाँ विशाल देखो, गुड, थैंक यू फॉर मेंशनिंग दैट, बिकॉज दिस इज व्हाट आई वांट आल्सो यू टू आंसर, कि इवन टुडे ट्रेडिशनली छोड़ो, traditionally we have seen how well music was used, and in so many different ways. We're using it in less ways now, and yet you also believe, like you mentioned the example of Jhelam song, that there are places where not only is it organic to the situation that it should be musically or expressed through a song, but also you feel it's desirable, because if you were to not have that, then perhaps you would not really be able to get the ras that you're perhaps expecting. What are those situations? Can you just off the top of your head enumerate from your point of view as a storyteller, what are those situations where you feel even today songs lend themselves very naturally to that situation in the script?
आई थिंक दीज इमोशनल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स जहाँ पे होते हैं, ये तो एक सबसे बड़ी सिचुएशन तो यही होती है. एक और वो पता नहीं कौन सी सिचुएशन होती है, वो तो आप 22 बता रहे, तो कुछ जॉनर है तो उसमें से हम छांट सकते हैं.
One day I had written an essay on that.
वो तो उसमें से हम छांट सकते हैं कि कौन कौन से नंबर के जो होते हैं. पर मैं अपनी फिल्मों से ही एग्जांपल दे सकता हूँ, क्योंकि जैसे ओमकारा में एक बहुत अच्छा यूज़ हुआ था जगजारी गुड़िया, जहाँ वो उसको जगाता है, यूजुअली लुलाबी सुलाने के लिए होती है, पर वो उसको जगाता है सुबह, और वो फर्स्ट हाफ में जब सीन आता है तो अजय एंड करीना दे आर ऑन दैट स्विंग, और जहाँ वो गाना गा रहा है, तो वो उसमें रियलिज्म लाने के लिए मैंने वो गाना एक क्लिक पे रिकॉर्ड किया सुरेश जी की आवाज़ में, और वहाँ पे जाके मैंने शूट किया, क्योंकि शूट करने के लिए यू हैव बिकॉज सिंगर को लिप सिंक करना पड़ेगा, तो मैंने वो क्लिक पे वो गाना शूट किया, और पोस्ट में आके मैंने उसमें से सारा म्यूज़िक, सारा क्लिक निकाल के वॉइस को ऐसे ट्रीट किया और दोबारा बुला के उन्हें गवाया, और सारा एटमॉस्फेयर के साथ मिला के उसको किया. तो जब उसका पहला ट्रायल हुआ तो शाहरुख मेरे पास आया कि आई एम सो डिप्रेस, हाउ कैन अजय सिंग सो वेल. So I told him it's not Ajay singing, it's Suresh ji singing for him. But it was used in such a realistic way. Same way, in climax that song comes again, and this time it's like with full orchestration where he has killed Desdemona. And Suresh is singing. On top of that, Ajay is also whispering. We have both the voices, where the singer is singing and complete the way he should be singing, and on top of that, the actor is singing, and it's not lip sync. The lyrics is going somewhere else in the background, and the actor is whispering. It's not in a sync, and that really worked. So I am also trying to discover the way to use music as realistic as possible. And this is what my approach as a filmmaker and a composer. That what is the best way to use music realistically in a film?
So it is, so that the inclination seems to be towards a more realistic portrayal of story situations.
Yeah, or it should be totally so stylistic where you don't need to be realistic. So like Jagga Jasoos, the way Anurag has used music is phenomenal. I think no filmmaker has done it except थोड़ा सा रोमानी हो जाए अमोल ने किया था. But हमारे हिस्ट्री में ट्रेडिशन में किसी ने प्योर म्यूजिकल फॉर्म में जिस तरीके से ओपनली आके अनुराग ने यूज किया है, आई हैव द प्रॉब्लम इज विद द स्क्रिप्ट एंड द स्टोरी, बट एज ए डायरेक्टर द वे ही हैज यूज्ड म्यूजिक. यहाँ हीरोइन गाते गाते बीच में ये बोलती है कि मैं क्यों गा रही हूँ, वो बात कर रही है उससे क्योंकि वो और सडनली से बट मैं क्यों गाना गा रही हूँ, मैं तो सीधे बात कर सकती हूँ. एंड देन शी स्टार्ट सिंगिंग अगेन. अब फिर तुक्का लगा या सब खाना खा के दारू पी के चले गए. तो या तो इतना स्टाइलिस्टिकली हो जहाँ पे रियलिज्म को हम जानबूझ के छोड़ रहे हैं, शर्म की वजह से नहीं छोड़ रहे हैं. तो अभी क्या हो रहा है कि वो थोड़ी सी शर्म है, कहीं संकोच है, ना पूरा छोड़ पा रहे हैं ना पूरा पकड़ पा रहे हैं. तो आई वॉन्ट टू बी इन अ सिचुएशन वेयर आइदर कि पूरा जान दे के पूरा कि हाँ हम लोग अनरियलिस्टिक इसको स्टाइलिस्टिकली यूज कर रहे हैं, और या ये कि या बिल्कुल उसको रियलिज्म में यूज कर रहे हैं.
Later I want your view on this also, so I'm going to come to you on this, about this, that what are the evolving ways in which we are now using music, and this whole tension that he's talking about, that some coach bhi hai, or at the same time there's a need to also celebrate the form, and we're sort of falling between two stools sometimes. Jaideep, forgive me for a second, I'm sort of jumping to Anna. Have you seen Jagga Jasoos? Jagga Jasoos?
No.
Ah, you should. A lot of you have seen Jagga Jasoos, so you're aware of what, unfortunately the film didn't do very well, and that was really a bit of a shame. But anyway, it didn't do well for various other reasons. But here the thing is that Anurag Basu experimented with music here, and which truly is, I mean, both Vishal and I sort of seem to feel, I don't know, Jaideep, have you seen it? No, you haven't seen it.
I know.
Where a lot of the scenes are enacted. Anish, have you seen that at all? Yeah. A lot of the scenes are enacted with two characters singing to each other, and I think sometimes he uses a singer's voice and sometimes it is their own voice. Isn't it what he was doing? I couldn't make out very clearly.
No. It was all lip sync.
Meaning somebody else's voice.
Somebody else is singing.
Yeah. But the scenes are actually being enacted in that, and verse and all, and nice. I think Amitabh wrote the lyrics of that. So unfortunately, I think Anurag must have been heartbroken, that it didn't sort of work, at least for this reason, and we also felt bad. And he couldn't come today, by the way, so apologies from his side.
Yeah,
also.
I wish he was here, so we could have told him that
yes.
it failed not because of his musical form. It failed because of other reason, because the script was not good.
Yeah, it was good.
Not because of music.
But that's why it's so difficult. But what is so difficult.
I don't think you'd have told him that on his face.
That's why I'm saying on the public platform.
Yeah. No, of course it is true. No.
He needs to be told that it was such a great effort as a director. But where he failed himself as like Jagisab tells me, that, I failed myself as writer.
Yeah. So he tells you that, is it?
He said in front of you.
Oh, in the Omkara thing. Yeah. No, I remember. Okay, sorry, I didn't know you were referring to that.
Famous line is that you failed in Makbul, you failed Shakespeare, and in Munkara, Shakespeare failed you.
Shakespeare let you down. Yeah. Shakespeare took his revenge. Yeah. That's what he said. Shakespeare took his revenge.
I really need to know what happened in Hyder.
Yeah, no, this is August 2006, the first Screenwriters Conference which took place. Anna, please, this again, to take that question forward, how is it evolving right now? I want you to specify that there are still certain situations where songs naturally seem to emerge in popular Hindi cinema, and certain situations where you have observed that now no longer do you need songs to express those. You mentioned one thing which was about love, okay, and the whole melodramatic edge, okay. Do you want to elaborate on that a little further, perhaps?
I see.
You've been watching Hindi films.
Yes, yes,
right?
not as much as I used to do, but I do still. I think the songs which are a big spectacle dance number, most films have at least one. And I think part of the reason is there's the whole circuit outside of the films where people are choreographing these songs and dances for weddings and for shows and so on. There's this huge Bollywood dance craze going on outside of the film. So I think that's feeding the films, and the films are feeding this. So I think most films have at least one, if not more, really big dance numbers.
Okay.
And these are usually somehow staged in some manner that is realistic, in the sense that, you know, it's a wedding or it's a party or just a whole lot of people start dancing the street, or, you know, so that's kind of realistic. It's over the top. It's, you know, it's wonderful. It's colourful, but it is still realistic in a sense.
There's a certain logic given
There's
to
a logic,
right,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's,
what else? What
it can
about
be
the
placed.
individual songs?
Or there's you know, one of the characters is a performer. This is in older Hindi films. This goes way back. I guess comedy, because songs can be comic, having someone singing. But I think the love songs are more in the background. But even some, I forget which song it is, from Veer, the film Veer. I was noticing the way it was Salman Khan's song. I can't remember the song name, but it was very. It was almost like he wasn't singing it. He was just, you could see his lips syncing, but there was no bodily movement. Where usually in the classic Hindi film song, the gestures are very exaggerated. They're very, you know, largely performed outwards.
Depending on the situation.
So I thought that was interesting.
Depending on the mood of the situation, if the hero or the character is in a sober mood or a sad mood, then you don't have those exaggerated gestures happening. You've seen the recent ones. Have you seen
but a song
the
like
big ones? Bajrangi Bhaijan, then Sultan, Dangal.
Bajrangi.
If you've seen these three, just make a comment on
think
these.
about the film Ek Villain. So that was that's a thriller. And there you have the song Galiyan. This is all in the background. That song in an older Hindi film, I think that would have had to be foregrounded. That song. So that was a background song. It was a montage. There were lots of scenes of them together, sharing beautiful moments. But it was all in the background. Okay. So I think that's a very that's quite a common format now, and that's a really big change.
So essentially, what you're saying, Anna, if I sort of catch you right, is that either you have a certain logic inserted into that situation of the script where there is a larger celebration, where there is pomp and show and ceremony, etc. taking place, or if it is meant to be more personal in terms of expression, then it's usually in the background. Isn't that what
Not
you're
entirely.
saying?
And then I feel like Bajrangi Bhaijan, it is a very big, spectacular film. That's that's aiming for a very mainstream audience, whereas Ek Villain, say, that's aiming for more, that's more the kind of genre cinema. But even in actually the Tanu Weds Manu Revisited, thinking of that, I found that last song she sings, so the hero and her double are about to get married. It's their wedding, and she comes to perform. She comes to dance at the wedding, which is very unrealistic. Never mind. She starts to dance at the wedding, and she sings this song of what's Hamra Hogi or something. I've gone crazy for you. And she's so she sings this song, and then just at the moment her eyes meet the heroes, and they exchange this look, and you can see, you know, she really loves him, he really loves her. And this whole marriage then gets called off. But just that moment, then the lip sync stops.